We're back with another top 10 strongest of a generation. This time it's Gen 5. Like usual, this list won't be restricted to only Pokemon that made their debut in Gen 5, but rather Pokemon that are the best specifically within the mechanics and nuances of this generation, especially from a high-level competitive point of view. But one day perhaps, maybe we'll do like the top 10 strongest Univin Pokemon or something like that. As usual with these lists, Pokemon in the Uber tier of competitive are banned. So, like always, no Pokemon like Mewtwo, Reshiram, and Kyogre. And yeah, even Blaziken is also banned from making this list, since it is an Uber Pokemon. The first time this has happened to a starter, Speed Boost was just that good. Generally, this list tends to focus on Pokemon that are strong in standard play, or the overused tier of competitive Pokemon if you prefer. With those clarifications out of the way, let's get right into the list you came here for. But Mystic reads first. After a lot of thought, I decided to give the number 10 spot to Keldeo. I remember this Pokemon used to be considered more of a top 3 mon in this generation back in the day, but over the years, other Pokemon have taken those spots for Black and White. But Keldeo is still easily good enough to make our list. It's often used with Choice Specs or Choice Scarf, but this mythical Pokemon comes with a lot of options, so there are other viable approaches. Just don't expect to see them very often over more heavy offensive based sets if you go and watch some Black and White competitive. If you like Keldeo's secret move, Secret Sword, then you'll be happy to know that yes, it's actually really good outside of just being a cool unique attack. No matter what your approach is, whether it be a more unusual style of using this Pokemon, like a Toxic Set or something, Secret Sword is going to see potential use as one of your stab moves. Of course, you'll have strong water options like Hydro Pump, but Gen 5 also introduced Scald as an option, which has a 30% chance to burn and has some decent power, being only slightly weaker than Surf. While not that many players use this on Keldeo, prepare to see it on other Pokemon on this list. Overall though, it's an easy to use Pokemon with an interesting typing and an excellent 580 base stat total. With this, the stats are distributed rather well actually, making it get good usage in the OU tier. Tentacruel was actually very good in Gen 4, but with the more weather-heavy meta and new move options, it just ascended to another level in Gen 5. Tentacruel has always been a respectable niche use, but it gets way more usage and is generally appreciated more now among players that are still duking it out in Black and White battles. Not only did people grow to appreciate its utility role more, but some recent role changes in Gen 5 competitive battles have actually helped it stand above others that would have taken its place on the list. And yes, if you're not familiar, every generation of Pokemon still has a dedicated community behind it, and will continue evolving the competitive meta to this day. Gen 5 getting changes feels the most significant to me in this way in more recent years since it kind of needed it. But anyway, Tentacruel is one of the premier users of Scald, which was immediately a really controversial move. That power combined with the high burn chance is really insane, and even when it was first introduced, people were already calling for a ban on it. This, combined with the always valuable Rapid Spin, speaks for itself. Combine it with Toxic and Protect, and you have your bread and butter annoying Tentacruel set that can absolutely torture teams. It also got the Rain Dish ability in Gen 5, so it would slowly heal throughout the battle when Rain is active, which is going to be pretty often in this weather-dependent generation. Then, you've got its excellent special defense and good enough HP. And it's not hard to see why this Pokemon excels. While being weak to Ground and Psychic is still no fun, overall, Tentacruel deserves to be remembered as one of the great water-type threats of Gen 5's mechanics. At number 8, we've got Excadrill. And honestly, you look at the ground steel combo and you look at those stats, and you pretty much know why this thing is good. It's hard to give a refreshing thought regarding this Pokemon beyond what you're already thinking as you heard its name. Gee, I wonder what its most reliable stab attack option is. It's obviously Earthquake. It has access to Rapid Spin like Tentacruel, and can also run with Toxic or Stealth Rock if it wants, while still being a far more offensively based Pokemon than our previous entry. And for Steel Stab, Iron Head is a common choice. At the end of the day, its speed is alright, its HP is excellent, and its physical attack is nearly unmatched, which makes Choice Scarf sets pretty viable. But the simpler choice of leftovers seems to be the most popular, and the most successful too. If your team were to be compared to a party of superheroes, Excadrill is Wolverine. It's simple, it hits hard, maybe it'll get to recover its health slowly during the battle, and Magnezone can counter it as if it were Magneto. I actually didn't expect the X-Men comparison to go that far. I'm actually kind of shocked. But regardless, it's a simple offensive Pokemon with a great typing that's enjoyed at a high level of play even beyond Black and White. Ladies and gentlemen, the time has come. You see, Gen 5 is where I originally really got familiar and comfortable with player versus player battles in Pokemon. I think a lot of you guys watching can relate, especially with how the previous gen was the one that introduced Wi-Fi battling and made it more accessible in the first place. Of course, today, it's easier to check out competitive battling for all the generations all the way back to Gen 1. But even with some fans finding Gen 5 a little weird with its power creep, crazy held items, and permanent weather, it remains one of my favorites. I personally liked being able to take advantage of permanent weather when the game was new, which means I really liked the number 7 pick, Politoed. A younger teen mystic was really putting in work with this guy back in the day. Its hidden ability caused permanent rain to appear on the battlefield in Gen 5, and it just made the meta crazy, for better or worse. So many great Pokemon become even better thanks to Politoed. It's a total game changer for how people approach their teams. For some of you, Politoed, despite not being the strongest, is still the face of Gen 5 competitive. The permanent rain is that significant, and ultimately makes it even more of a menace than Tentacruel despite having a very similar moveset, though the two actually work best together. Generally, you'll be using the usual combo of moves like Scald, Toxic, Protect, or some other moves to frustrate the enemy like Encore. Even though Politoed stalls, keep in mind one of its main purposes on the team is to support with Rain to allow other members of your team to be more offensively effective, especially if that teammate is something like Keldeo. If I go through every detail on how Politoed affects each individual Pokemon in OU by merely existing, and how it's made the tier pretty controversial among its peers, we'll be here forever. Basically, Politoed's Drizzle ability alone makes it a memorable menace that changed everything, in spite of its very cute animation. Number 6 is a returning Pokemon from a much older generation's top 10 list, one that takes us back to a simpler time, Alakazam. Black and White marks the best this Pokemon has been since Red, Blue, and Yellow. This is partially due to being able to take on some of the best new Pokemon in the game, but also receiving Magic Guard as its new ability. It was known for having become one of the best Focus Sash users around. And even with a lot of Black and White's power creep, Alakazam's 135 special attack and 120 speed are still to be revered. It's also not a terribly complicated Pokemon to optimize compared to others, relying on stab attacks of course, but also having a plethora of coverage options. For the most part, Alakazam can struggle against Pokemon that are faster than it, which is now less rare than it was in Gen 1. It's also a bit of a victim of Pokemon's 4-move limitation, as it does partially rely on taking advantage of all that coverage to surprise its enemies. Picking the wrong coverage or just not being able to take all of its strong options definitely feels bad sometimes. But overall, it's a Pokemon that was still respectable after Gen 1, but had a full return to glory in Gen 5. Starting our top 5 is a Pokemon that, while not making our top 10 in Gen 4 list, was really close and one of the top players, Gliscor. This is a mon that's been accepted as one of the best in every core game it's had the privilege of appearing in. It's gifted with a wonderful typing that only has 2 weaknesses, albeit that 4 times weakness to ice can be trouble, since some Pokemon will run it for coverage. But even then, Gliscor can also cause trouble for its counter with its own Stab Earthquake, including Mamoswine, one of its premier threats. Gliscor's stats abandon the concept of having effective special attacks and goes big on defense, decent on speed and attack, and passable HP and special defense. Gliscor also gets the incredible ability of Poison Heal in Gen 5, making it yet another powerful Toxic Orb holder. On top of all of this, it also has access to the troublesome Stealth Rock, assuming you're not running a Swords Dance set where you probably won't be using it. Both sets are very good and viable, however. Its other weaknesses, besides water and ice attacks, are generally just Pokemon with really high stats that can just overpower it, like Dragonite, a pretty common Pokemon in the tier and also one of the best. But still, the Poison Heal ability, typing, solid offense, Stealth Rock, and competently handled stats, Gliscor speaks for itself as it usually does. Our next entry is anything but humble. Well, not the normal form. That one's banned to Ubers, disqualifying it from being able to be on this list. But its Therian form is not banned, and as expected, it ends up being pretty crazy. It's yet another great ground flying type, and with that, you can probably see why Hidden Power Ice is still a pretty popular coverage choice among several Pokemon. It's kind of what you expect from a non-banned legendary, an excellent stat total that you can't usually go wrong with. And in Lando T's case, it's that 145 base physical attack. The rest of the stat spread is pretty good and fairly balanced. With Earthquake and Stealth Rock, its role is actually similar to our previous entry, and while I ultimately think Landorus should be ranked higher, they're more even than you think due to the difference in their abilities. Intimidate is good, but Poison Heal with Toxic Orb on Gliscor is what really makes it close to Landorus, at least in my opinion. I think one obvious big difference that's appealing, of course, is Landorus' ability to OHKO stuff more easily with its own Swords Dance set because of its incredible stats in general. But some may prefer Gliscor for their team composition overall. If Politoed wasn't the Pokemon you were waiting to see me mention on this list, then it's definitely our number 3 pick, Ferrothorne. This thing is so impactful as a support mon that some players would consider it the number 1 pick, and it's actually pretty valid. Ferrothorne is that good. Hell, it stayed good beyond even Gen 5. It's got Stealth Rock, Spikes, it's got Crazy Stab with Gyro Ball and Power Whip, it's got Knockoff, and of course that Grass Steel typing is an excellent defensive typing, as I'm sure you already know. Both of its defense stats are excellent, and its physical attack is also a solid base 94 to boot. Its ×4 weakness to fire is of course not ideal, just like any other 4x weakness, but it's not the most common move typing to use as coverage. But with those move options, the signature Iron Barb's ability, the great defensive stats, the typing, it's just built different. It can also run Leech Seed with leftovers, to really have longevity while being obnoxious all at once if you choose to run it that way. If it didn't have the crazy stab options like Gyro Ball, it'd be already amazing. But the fact it can hit back hard while also having this stuff going on spells disaster for you. It's not totally unstoppable though. Fire and fighting types are obviously a problem, and of course Magnezone's Magnet Pull is always reliable against it. But generally, the positives vastly outweigh the negatives, and it's one of the most iconic Pokemon in Black and White. So, what Pokemon could be ranked directly above Ferrothorne? Well, it's actually one of the first Pokemon I can think of that can mess with it, Latios. Its typing isn't as defensively great as Ferrothorne's, but the stats make up for it. Crazy special stats and excellent speed, with Draco Meteor and some great coverage options. But my favorite gimmick that's actually quite popular for Latios is using Trick with it. Against Ferrothorne in particular, you can really ruin its entire game plan by using Trick holding a Choice Scarf. It's not an uncommon strategy to keep in mind when having a Latios on your team at all. Between Permanent Rain, the held items, new abilities, and the rise of this Trick strategy at the time, it's no wonder the Black and White meta feels like a salt mine. Besides a Choice Scarf set, Choice Specs is usually the one I've seen used the most, since Latios is such an impressive powerhouse of Draco Meteor, and Surf is an extremely popular coverage move for it too. It's almost unstoppable outside of when it has to deal with Steel types and certain Pokemon that can naturally outspeed it. But its main counter is actually our number 1 pick. But before that, some real quick honorable mentions to shout out some of the other Pokemon that are also truly great in Gen 5. Keep in mind, I'll be missing more viable Pokemon than usual, because at this point in the series, there are just a lot of very good Pokemon. Dragonite, which we've mentioned earlier. Super strong and feels right at home with Gen 5's mechanics. It's also got the multi-scale ability here. Skarmory could have made the top 10, but was just short this time. Though I'm sure you guys are tired of me bringing it up after the last 3 strongest lists I put together. Garchomp is finally out of the Uber tier hell after Gen 4. It's as good as you would expect, but it was actually a lot more popular to use in Gen 5 battles when Black and White was new than today. Volcarona, one of the most iconic Pokemon introduced this gen. Believe it or not, it wasn't long ago they were considering banning it, but instead, they ended up banning the gem items instead, which Volcarona benefited greatly from for a long time. Man, some of these crazy abilities and items introduced in Gen 5 might need their own video at this point. Terrakion, an excellent offensive Pokemon with a ton of moveset options. It was popular in standard play really early in the game's release. Jellicent, really underrated and one of the better spin blockers in the game, and known as one of the few Pokemon that can frustrate Ferrothorne with Will-O-Wisp and Taunt. Other honorable mentions are Scizor, Cloyster, Reuniclus, Mamoswine, Heatran, Jirachi, Breloom, Starmie, Xatu, Magnezone, Ninetales, Rotom, and Thundurus. Well, you knew it was coming. You knew this was gonna be Tyranitar. When I started this list, I was planning on putting it at number 2 under Latios, but the more I re-embraced Gen 5 while researching and watching matches for this video, the more I realized this beast was too much. This is the 3rd video in the Strongest series where it's been in the top 2. And it's been in the top 10 since its introductory gen. It's crazy that it stays this good when it has so many weaknesses with its Rock-Dark typing combo. But being immune to Psychic has been pretty big with every game so far. And it continues to be a big deal, since that immunity really puts a wrench in Latios and Alakazam, 2 common Psychic types that get a lot of use in standard play. Stab Pursuit, as usual, is seriously gross, and leaves you second guessing how you need to approach this monstrosity when you don't have the ideal mon out. Look, we could talk about Crunch, Choice Scarf sets, and Stealth Rock, coverage, and whatever. But you've heard it all before with this guy. Its ability Sandstream will also keep Rain out of the game, and we've already established how insane Rain is in this gen. And of course, summoning Sandstorm in its place is pretty annoying, especially if there are other hazards on top of the constant damage on you. Basically, if you're not looking at Rain, you're probably looking at Sand. You can probably see why this meta isn't for everyone. That being said, it's not as much of a menace in this meta as Snorlax in Gen 2, but I guess no one is. Tyranitar can still be countered, especially by fighting type attacks. But this pseudo-legendary's defenses and HP are pretty good, so otherwise, it won't be too easy to just take it out. But overall, yeah, it's hard to find any new original thoughts about Tyranitar's position at the top once again, especially with its proven track record. It's just still too good at this point in the series.
The numbers don't lie, and they spell disaster for you!
And that's it for the top 10 strongest Pokemon available in Gen 5. Do you agree with this list? I don't think there's quite an objective answer here, even more so than usual. What does your list look like? How do you like Gen 5 competitive compared to what came before and after? Let me know down below. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching my content. With Scarlet and Violet DLC on the way, we have a lot to be excited for. Not just that though, but I've got a bunch of other cool series planned throughout the year that I'm sure you guys will love. If you want to support my other forms of content, over on Mystic Reads, I read fanfics. One of them right now is Road to be a Pokemon Master Kanto Edition, where Ash and Serena start from the very beginning and journey through Kanto together. On Mystic Umbreon Shorts, I do other exclusive Pokemon content such as Pokemon Facts, and on Saturdays I upload my top 5 favorite Pokemon of a type. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have an excellent day.